Rain-slicked asphalt glimmered under the dying afternoon sun as a German shepherd lay sprawled on the shoulder of Highway 37. Cars swerved past, tires hissing through puddles, but no one slowed. Its fur was matted, one hind leg twisted at an impossible angle, and a faint whimper escaped between shallow breaths. A tag dangled from its collar, catching the light, a tiny, unremarkable rectangle that would change everything for the one person willing to stop. From the safety of her worn sedan, retired Nurse Margaret Hale's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Something in that tag whispered urgency, sorrow, and secrets long buried. Margaret Hale had never considered herself brave. At 62, retired from 38 years of nursing the city, she had settled into the rhythm of quiet mornings and long, aimless drives through the countryside surrounding Clearwater, a small town that had outlived its notoriety, but not its secrets. The rain had eased into a mist, leaving the air thick with damp earth and the scent of wet pine. She was driving home from the pharmacy when she first saw it, a German shepherd lying motionless on the shoulder of Highway 37, the metal guardrail glinting behind it. At first, she assumed someone had hit it. That happened often enough in rural stretches like this, where drivers were either distracted or careless. But something about the dog made her hesitate. Its eyes, partially open and clouded with pain, seemed to recognize her, though she had never met this creature before. Cars continued to roar past. A semi-truck lifted its horn in irritation as a silver sedan swerved to avoid the animal. She gripped the wheel tighter, her knuckles whitening. Most people would drive on, rationalizing away. It's just a dog, they'd say, or someone else will stop. But Margaret couldn't. Something in her chest twisted, half professional instinct, half maternal empathy. She pulled over, her tires crunching against gravel. Rain began to fall again, light at first, then in steady, cold drizzles that soaked to the fabric of her jacket. Margaret slipped her hands into thin gloves and carefully approached. The dog raised its head with a weak, hoarse whine. Its fur was soaked and clumped with mud, and blood matted one side of its leg. It had been lying here for hours, perhaps longer. Margaret's voice was low, gentle. "Hey, boy, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." She crouched beside him, feeling a shiver run through her at the sheer vulnerability of the animal. The tag around its neck dangled loosely, almost insignificant. A tiny rectangle stamped with letters she couldn't yet make out in the dim light. Her gloved fingers brushed against it, and for a moment she froze. The tag wasn't just a name and a phone number. It carried a warning, subtle but undeniable, the kind that makes your heart pound before you even read the words. Before she could examine it closer, a red pickup truck passed at too high a speed, splashing water across her boots. She flinched, and the dog flinched with her, whimpering. Margaret's chest tightened. People didn't notice the suffering. They never did. And that anger, sharp and bitter, mixed with her worry, made her decision instantly clear. She would not leave him here. By the time she lifted him into the back of her car, a feat made agonizingly difficult by his weight and the injured leg, Margaret's hands were trembling. The dog groaned softly, resting his head against her shoulder. She caught a whiff of his musk, wet fur, dirt, and something she couldn't place. Fear, maybe, or the residue of panic that came from being abandoned. The drive back to her small home on the outskirts of Clearwater was tense. Every bump in the road made the dog wince. She kept talking to him quietly, telling him stories about her patients, her old cat, even about a neighbor's nosy parrot. Her words were an attempt to fill the silence, to convince both of them that the world could be safe again, even if only temporarily. It wasn't until she pulled into her driveway that she finally got a proper look at the tag. The letters were etched cleanly, simple, but the effect was immediate, a jolt of recognition that made her stomach churn. The name on the tag wasn't just a name. It was connected to a story she had buried long ago, one that she had hoped never confront again. A story involving missing pets, frightened children, and a man who had once been trusted but had broken that trust in the most devastating ways. Margaret set the dog down gently in her kitchen. He limped but followed her like a shadow, his eyes wary, still clouded with pain. She fetched a towel and began carefully cleaning the dried blood from his leg. He flinched at first, but eventually allowed her to work, leaning slightly into her hands. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. Her phone buzzed with notifications she ignored. She needed focus. She needed clarity. She needed to make a decision. She couldn't just call animal control. Those people were bureaucratic, slow, detached. The dog needed something more immediate, something personal. And for reasons she couldn't fully explain, Margaret felt it had to come from her. As she worked, memories she had long suppressed clawed their way back. She remembered a summer, 25 years ago, when a German shepherd had disappeared from the local fairgrounds. She had been a young nurse then, and a young girl had cried inconsolably for hours, insisting the dog was her only friend, her protector. That dog had never been found. The thought of this one lying there, ignored on a highway, triggered a pain she hadn't felt in decades. The dog's breathing grew steadier as she wrapped a makeshift bandage around the injured leg. He let out a soft sigh, and Margaret found herself whispering, almost under her breath, "You're safe now. I promise." She glanced out the window. Rain was coming down heavier now, painting the world in muted grays. Somewhere beyond the trees lining her property, the highway continued, filled with people driving by, none of them stopping. And she understood something essential. Stopping in this world wasn't just an act of kindness. It was a moral choice, one that often came with consequences. The tag still glimmered in the dim kitchen light. Margaret's hands hovered over it, uncertain. She had a sinking feeling that reading it would pull her into something she wasn't ready for, something dangerous, perhaps even life-threatening. But curiosity and compassion combined into a force stronger than fear. She inhaled deeply, bracing herself. The letters on the tag spelled a name she recognized immediately, and with that recognition came questions. Why had this dog been abandoned here? Who had done this? And most importantly, what were they trying to hide? The faint tapping of rain on the roof, the dog's quiet whine, the rhythmic tick of the clock on the wall. They all merged into a tense silence. Margaret felt the weight of the moment, the gravity of her next decision. To act, to pursue the truth, could open old wounds she had long kept closed. But to ignore it, to leave it be, was unthinkable. She pressed her lips together and muttered softly, almost as if speaking to herself, "I'll find you. I'll find the answers. And no one will ignore this again." The dog leaned against her, as if understanding. Margaret could feel the subtle tremor in his body, a mixture of pain and relief. That tremor mirrored something inside her, a mix of dread and determination. She had a choice to make. And soon, the world she had built around routine, quiet, and safety would crumble. The highway, the rain, the tag, it was all a summons, a call to action she could not ignore. Margaret sighed, straightened her shoulders, and reached for the tag again. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing. This dog had chosen her, and she would follow the trail no matter where it led. And as she did, the first of many secrets began to unravel. A secret that would expose lies, betrayals, and truths that had been hidden in plain sight for decades. For now, though it was just her, the dog, and the storm outside, and a single, quiet resolve, that no living creature, human or animal, would be abandoned and ignored under her watch. Margaret glanced down at him again. "We'll get through this together." And in that small kitchen, with rain dripping from the eaves and the dog leaning into her warmth, the first threads of a dark, twisted story began to weave themselves. The morning came slow and gray, filtered through rain-slick windows and the lingering mist that clung to the treetops around Margaret's home. The German shepherd, whom Margaret had decided to call Raven, a name chosen impulsively for Sheena Black's fur, lay in a carefully prepared corner with blankets and a shallow dish of water. His breathing was steadier than yesterday, though he flinched at every sudden noise, his amber eyes wary. Margaret moved quietly through her kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee she didn't really want. Her thoughts were tangled, spinning around the tag's name and what it meant. Jared Whitlock. The name felt like a punch to the gut, a sharp ache she had carried for decades. Jared had been a trusted neighbor, a local businessman, someone who had seemed respectable, until his betrayal had torn the town's small community apart. Missing pets, children's rumors, whispered accusations, all of it had surrounded him like a shadow, and now Decades later, a dog with his name on a tag lay in her kitchen, wounded and frightened. Margaret's hand shook slightly as she dialed the old number she had memorized from the town directory, a reflexive holdover from her nursing days. The line rang, then clicked into voicemail. She left a brief message. "This is Margaret Hale. It's about Raven. Please call me back." She hung up, knowing the likelihood of a response was slim. Jared had disappeared from town 10 years ago under murky circumstances, leaving unanswered questions and a trail of suspicion. Margaret sighed, glancing at Raven. He had lifted his head slightly, ears flicking at the sound of the wind brushing against the house. His leg had swollen overnight, and she knew she needed more than bandages. But she also knew taking him to a regular vet might draw attention. In Clearwater, news traveled faster than wildfire. People remembered things, especially things they shouldn't. She wrapped him in a blanket and loaded him into her old Ford pickup. The drive to the vet was tense, punctuated by the dog's low whines and the occasional glance at her through the rearview mirror. Rain continued to fall, streaking the windshield and muffling the rural world outside. Every so often, a branch would scrape against the side of the truck, or a crow would take flight from the roadside, sending a flurry of feathers into the gray air. Margaret's heart thumped against her ribs. At the vet, a young assistant named Chloe led them to a back room. She looked nervous, stealing glances at Margaret. He's in bad shape," Chloe whispered. "What happened to him?" Margaret hesitated. The story was too complicated for small talk. "Found him on the highway," she said simply. "He's my responsibility for now." The vet, Dr. Soren, an older man with crow's-feathered hair and sharp, penetrating eyes, examined Raven with practiced efficiency. His furrowed brow deepened as he noted the swelling, bruising, and a faint set of old scars. "This wasn't just an accident," he said softly. "This dog's been through hell, and not recently. Someone's been neglecting him for months, maybe years." Margaret's stomach sank. Her instincts screamed that this was true. She had felt it the moment she saw him on the highway, the hesitation, the hopelessness in his eyes. And now confirmed. She swallowed hard. "Do you think someone did this on purpose?" Dr. Soren shook his head slowly. "It's possible, and if so, it's deliberate cruelty. But there's something else." He hesitated, then held out the tag. Margaret took it, hands tightening around the cold metal. The name Jared Whitlock glinted back at her. Her chest went cold. She had not expected this. She had expected a random owner, a careless driver, maybe even a small-town neglect situation. But this was a ghost from her past. The ride home was heavier than before. Margaret's mind raced, connecting dots she had long tried to ignore. Jared Whitlock's name had surfaced in local police files more than once. There had been complaints, sightings, rumors of stolen pets. And now, the proof was alive, wounded, and staring at her from the back seat with eyes that seemed to plead, "Do not fail me." Back at her house, Margaret tended to Raven, giving him a makeshift bath to remove mud and dried blood. He stiffened under her hands at first, but gradually relaxed. She whispered to him, telling him he was safe now, repeating the same words she had said the day before. Each repetition strengthened her resolve, bolstering the courage she had almost forgotten she possessed. But courage has a cost. By late afternoon, the first visitor arrived. Deputy Mark Jennings, a young man with thin mustache and an eagerness to prove himself. His eyes were wary as they met Margaret's. "Ma'am, we got reports of a dog found on the highway," he said cautiously. "I hear you've got him here?" Margaret measured her words carefully. "I do. He's injured badly. I need to care for him first." Deputy Jennings shifted uncomfortably. "We need to know where he came from. There's a lot of past incidents connected to this dog's breed and area." Her hand tightened around Raven's tag. "This dog needs help more than paperwork. That's all you need to know for now." The deputy glanced at her, a flicker of unease passing through his eyes. "Yes, ma'am. Just keep us informed, okay?" As the door clicked shut behind him, Margaret exhaled shakily. There was no going back now. The arrival of the deputy confirmed her suspicion. Someone, somewhere, was still watching, still tracking, still invested in keeping secrets buried. Night fell, and with it came unease. Margaret sat in the kitchen with Raven at her feet, the tag glinting in the soft lamplight. She had dug through town records, old police reports, newspaper clippings. Each piece of information was like a small blade, cutting through her calm and forcing her to confront the truth. Jared Whitlock had not only hurt animals, but he had manipulated people, broken trust, and vanished with no accountability. Raven whined softly, nudging her hand. She stroked his head, feeling his trust in her, fragile and delicate. She whispered promises she wasn't even sure she could keep. I will protect you. I will uncover the truth. I won't let history repeat itself. The sound of tires crunching gravel outside made her freeze. Shadows stretched across the living room, and her heart jumped. She peeked through the curtain. A figure was moving along the edge of her property, pausing to look up at the house. Margaret's pulse quickened. Whoever was had waited, watched, and now dared to approach. She grabbed her old flashlight and moved quietly to the door, leaving Raven in his blankets. The figure froze when she opened the door, revealing a man in his 40s, wet from the rain, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have taken him," he said, voice low, almost a growl. Margaret's jaw tightened. "Who are you?" The man's eyes flicked to Raven. "Doesn't matter who I am. What matters is you don't know what you've stumbled into." Margaret didn't back down. "I'm not afraid of a dog or a shadow. You don't scare me." He smiled then, faint, chilling, and not a smile of warmth. "Brave, aren't you? But bravery doesn't erase consequences." The man turned, stepping back into shadows. The rain masked his departure, but the unease lingered like smoke. Margaret closed the door and bolted it, her hands trembling. Raven whined from the corner, sensing her tension. She sank into her chair, exhausted, heart still hammering. The storm outside had intensified, rain pelting the roof in relentless sheets. Margaret realized then that her quiet life had ended. This was no longer just about rescuing a dog. It was about unearthing a network of betrayal, cruelty, and secrets that had been festering for decades. And she was at the center of it now. As she stroked Raven's head, she whispered to herself, almost in prayer, "We'll get through this. We have to." Somewhere deep in the night, a door creaked in the distance. Margaret tensed, listening. A reminder. The past wasn't done with her yet. And in the coming days, every step she took would bring her closer to a truth that could destroy everything she thought she knew about her town, the people in it, and the shadows they hid behind. The first threads of danger had been pulled, and the tapestry they revealed was darker than Margaret had anticipated. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world washed clean but eerily silent. Margaret awoke to a gray sky streaked with pale sunlight, droplets clinging to windows like reluctant tears. Raven lay at her feet, head resting on her slippered foot, eyes alert despite the obvious pain in his leg. Overnight, Margaret had barely slept, the image of the man in the shadows haunting every corner of her mind. She knew now that this wasn't just about a lost, injured dog. It was a confrontation waiting to happen. Margaret brewed a strong cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the tag glinting beside her. Jared Whitlock. The name felt heavier than ever, a rope tightening around her chest. She had spent hours combing through old files, town reports, and police logs, piecing together the fragments of a decades-old puzzle. Missing pets, rumors of stolen animals used for nefarious purposes, unexplained disappearances, and a man who had always been one step ahead of justice. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door, hard, deliberate. Margaret's heart leapt. She approached cautiously, Raven following close behind, ears pricked. Through the rain-streaked glass, she saw a familiar figure. It was Chloe, the young vet's assistant, drenched and shivering. Her eyes were wide, frantic. "Margaret, you need to come with me," Chloe said urgently. "It's Jared. He's back in town. He's at the old Whitlock property, and there's something you need to see." Margaret's stomach sank. She grabbed her coat and bundled Raven into a carrier, his whimpers breaking her heart. She followed Chloe into Ford, the young woman's driving tense, the silence thick with unspoken fear. The Whitlock property had been abandoned for years, a sprawling old estate on the outskirts of town, overgrown with weeds and shadowed by twisted trees. It was a place adults warned children about, a house that seemed to breathe with the memories of misdeeds and secrets. As they approached, Margaret felt the hairs on her neck rise. The front gate hung crooked, chains rusted and weak. Chloe stopped the car 100 yards away. "He's inside," she whispered. "I saw him this morning. He's not alone. There's a cage. You need to be careful." Margaret's pulse thundered. Her instincts screamed danger. She crouched behind a broken fence post, pulling Raven close. The dog sniffed the air, growling low in his throat. It was as if he knew the truth already. Sensing the fear, the malice, and the danger, Margaret and Chloe edged close to the house. Through a cracked window, they saw him. Jared Whitlock, older than she remembered, his face drawn but his eyes cold, calculating. He moved inside with precision, carrying a box that rattled softly. Margaret's breath caught when she saw the contents. Dozens of small cages, some containing birds, others empty, evidence of animals taken and abandoned. One cage held a trembling puppy, eyes wide and terrified. Margaret's fists clenched. The betrayal, the cruelty, the repetition of old sins, all surged through her. She whispered to Raven, "We're taking him back. No one gets left behind this time." Chloe flinched. "Margaret, we can't just barge in. He's dangerous. He might—" "We have no choice," Margaret said, voice steady despite the fear. "I've been ignoring warnings for decades. Not anymore." The plan was simple but dangerous. Distract Jared long enough to free the animals and escape. Margaret edged to the side of the house, peering through the window. Jared's movements were deliberate, almost methodical. He hadn't seen them yet. Margaret's mind raced. She remembered every lesson from her nursing days. How to stay calm under pressure, how to act decisively, and how to read the smallest cues in others' behavior. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, raising her voice just enough to be heard. "Jared, I know what you've done," she shouted. The man froze, eyes narrowing. "Margaret, I should have known you'd meddle," he said, voice low, venomous. "Still trying to play the savior? I'm not playing anything. You've hurt too many. It ends today." He laughed softly, a sound that sent chills down her spine. "Do you think you can stop me? After all these years?" Margaret's heart pounded. She glanced at Raven, who growled, the hair on his neck raised. With a sudden motion, she flung a small stone toward the side of the house, drawing Jared's attention. He turned, momentarily distracted. That was enough. Margaret and Chloe darted to the window, breaking the glass just enough to lift cages free. The first cage rattled. A puppy whimpered, and Margaret's heart clenched. She whispered reassurances, urging the frightened animal forward. But as they moved to the second cage, a shadow loomed behind them. Jared had returned, his face twisted with rage. "You think you can outsmart me?" he snarled. Raven lunged, barking with fury. His strength surprised both Margaret and Jared, and the dog's aggression bought them precious seconds. Margaret grabbed the cages, Chloe following closely behind. Jared lunged, but slipped on the wet ground outside, cursing as he fell. "Go! Now!" Margaret shouted. They sprinted across the yard, cages in hand, Raven running ahead, eyes gleaming with determination. Rain-slicked mud threatened to slow them, but adrenaline pushed them forward. Behind them, Jared's shouts grew distant as they reached Chloe's car. The drive back was silent, except for the whines and whimpers of the rescued animals. Margaret held Raven in her lap, stroking his head. Her chest heaved, the adrenaline fading into exhaustion. The storm outside had passed, but the emotional storm inside her was only beginning to settle. Back at her home, Margaret set the animals down, ensuring each was secure and safe. Raven lay beside her, exhausted but calm, as if he understood the magnitude of what had just happened. Margaret looked at the tag, glinting softly in the morning light. Jared Whitlock. The name no longer held fear. It held resolution. In the following days, she contacted the authorities, providing evidence, photographs, and testimony. Jared Whitlock was finally apprehended, his network of cruelty exposed for the first time. The town of Clearwater, long haunted by whispered rumors, began to heal, and Margaret found herself at the center of a quiet heroism. She never sought recognition, she never needed it. The gratitude in the eyes of the animals she saved, and the knowledge that she had finally made a difference, was enough. Late one evening, Margaret sat on her porch, Raven curled at her feet. The sky was a deep indigo, stars scattered like pinpricks of light. The events of the past weeks weighed heavily, yet there was a quiet satisfaction, a fragile peace. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "We did it, you and I." Raven rested his head on her knee, and she felt the warmth of life around her, the resilience of survival, the power of compassion, and the quiet strength in choosing to act when others ignored the suffering. Margaret knew the scars would remain, both hers and the town's, but she also knew this. The world could be cruel, but bravery, empathy, and persistence could illuminate even the darkest shadows. And sometimes all it took was one person willing to notice, willing to stop, willing to care. The wind whispered to the trees, carrying with it the faint promise of renewal. Margaret sipped her tea, Raven's steady breathing filling the quiet night. Somewhere beyond the horizon, life went on, but for Margaret, and for the dog who had chosen her, there was solace, there was closure, and there was hope. She glanced down at the tag one last time, running her fingers over the letters. Jared Whitlock. No longer a symbol of fear, no longer a shadow from the past. Just a reminder that courage and compassion, when paired together, could change everything. And for a small town that had once turned a blind eye, that lesson would linger far longer than the storm ever could.